It's crazy how the past couple of years, 3, 4 years, the audience and the popularity of women basket, it's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one, you're starting to see a bunch of like talent, and then I think it's also being showcased
Mm.
better than it ever was. I think, the comparable in my sport would be when East Africans figured out they could be great at distance running, and then all of a sudden they take over, right? So I think it's just getting that opportunity,
Yeah,
right? Which I think is really cool. So it's fun to
yeah,
watch.
it is. It is. The following is a conversation with Brant Stachel, a psychotherapist, massage therapist, and a high performance coach. Brant has worked with athletes at all levels, from marathon moms waking up at 4 a.m., believe it or not, to train, to Olympic contenders chasing their dreams. His unique approach blends mental resilience, emotional well being, and process driven success. I'm your host, Sid Ben Salah, and today we're diving into the psychology of performance. What does it take to push through setbacks, master mental resilience, and redefine success beyond just result? Let's dive in. Brant, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited. It'll be fun to chat.
Great. You've had an incredible journey starting as a college athlete battling personal struggles to becoming a coach and therapist. When did you realize that mental health was just as important as physical training?
That's a good question. I don't know if I could pinpoint any time that I was like, oh, okay, here we go. I think it was more a progression of, seeing things up close in person, coaching and, working with athletes and seeing that there was a bit of a missing edge or piece here to kind of the training paradigm. And so, my entire coaching career was just kind of adjusting to what I saw and needs in front of me and then trying to, be as good at that as I can. So I think it was just a natural progression with, my coaching background and the athletes I was working with that, this presented an opportunity for me to help even further and maybe help in different ways.
Mm, mm. How did overcoming an eating disorder shape the way you approach coaching and performance psychology?
Yeah, I think, from my own personal experiences, it was the idea that you never really know what's going on under the hood, right? So you could have coaches who don't know what athletes' struggles are or that they're struggling or how to deal with it. And so, having that personal experience myself allowed me to kind of rethink how I interact with athletes. And now on the, clinical side and mental performance side, recognizing there's, layers to the onion here that we want to peel back and understand so we can make sure that we are, not just handling topical things like, how do I run a faster 400 or climb the rock wall faster, but really like what's going on as a person so we can put you in a good space to, perform consistently throughout.
And Brent, if you could go back and give one piece of advice to your younger self as an athlete, what would it be?
Not every feeling you have is true, and you don't have to listen to all of them.
I like it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be the one. Yeah, it probably has a few more curse words if I were to say it to myself, actually. But yeah, that's the gist of
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. We hear a lot about mental toughness, but in your experience, what does really mental resilience look like in high performance sports?
I think it looks like a planned approach to handle it, right? Like a lot of us struggle because we think we're not resilient when something comes up, but we haven't planned for it, right? So, in my sport, track and field and long distance running, like if I said to you tomorrow as your coach, you're running a
Mm.
marathon, you'd be like, I'm not prepared for this. I can't do that. I'm not running enough. I haven't run my long runs and my marathon pace stuff. I don't even know how I would fuel with that, right? So I think we have this misnomer of a term where it's like, well, are you not mentally resilient or are you just not prepared, right? And I think that's the fundamentals of mental performance is preparing athletes to handle situations. Every athlete's going to come up against hard times, hard coaches, referees, if you're in a team sport, circumstances that they weren't prepared for. But if you can prepare and teach yourself how to handle tough situations and have a framework for how you think and navigate through it, that's really mental performance coaching at the basis of it,
Hmm.
right? And so, yes, athletes have problems that they might want to deal with. But all of that really is battling the unknown, right? And so what we want to do is create a framework that solidifies what your identity is, who you are, and then allows you to handle those external factors and
Yeah.
unknowns.
Can you share a specific case where an athlete you worked with in the past or recently would overcome a major mental hurdle?
Yeah, I think the common one in my world that I see more and more often is disordered eating in the endurance sport community, right? Or RED-S, relative energy deficiency
Mm.
syndrome. And so with athletes like that, there's a lot in it, right? Like we're a sport where, rightly or wrongly, probably more wrongly, athletes look up and they see who they want to be on the cover of running magazines or Instagram posts, right? And they neglect to see that that person's been training their body for 10 plus years, right? And that's what their body's formed into and forged in that training. And they think, well, if that's what that person looks like, I have to look like that, right? And so it's very hard to break that mindset, right? And it's very hard to break the mindset of like lighter is
Hmm.
faster. Because if you look at it purely from a engineering physics type perspective, sure, you're probably right, but that doesn't take into account all the variables of like hormonal health and happiness and injury resilience. And so a lot of the work in that domain is like psychoeducative, right? So
Hmm.
this is where I get to blend both my worlds, from the technical coaching world and the psychological world and the ex-phys world even too, and really explain the deficits of that, right? And work through it. And so it takes time because if we have what we call anchor beliefs, right?
Hmm.
So that's kind of the first belief you have, and it's anchored there. It's that thing that you hold on to, right? It's really hard to pull an anchor up,
Yeah.
really easy to drop an
Yeah.
anchor down, right? And so working with athletes like that, it's challenging their thought processes, maybe some of their cognitive schema that's going on with it. Maybe it's recognizing that they don't have the best group around them that's supporting them in the best way from a health perspective. And so you look at it from a really holistic approach and try to break some of those habits and thought cycles. And then sometimes you got to get a little bit lucky too, right? Where they have a good performance when they're doing the
Hmm.
right things, that like creates that behavioral reinforcement. But recently I've had a younger guy who I've coached for a couple of years now, had multiple fractures, REDs in college, wasn't really consistent in his performance. And working with him with the last 2 years, he's now on a path where he's thinking about the LA
Hmm.
Games, in some of the distance events. And so you look at something like that, and he says to me all the time, he's like, I'd never go back to the way I was before. Like, I'm so much happier. I'm so much healthier. Training's more fun. I enjoy life more often. Right. And so I think that's the cool stuff, where if you're not just focused on, hey, make sure you get enough food in, or hey, your results will suck if you do this, but like you really look at them as a person. It's like, look what you just gained,
Hmm.
right? Versus what you were losing before. So it's really fun to see that kind of transition.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. How do you train mental resilience in athletes who have never faced adversity?
Well, I would say first find me an athlete that's never faced adversity. That would be pretty hard, but some obviously have more than others,
Mm.
right? So like, adversity could be as simple as like you have this idea that the refs are
Mm.
against you in a team
Mm.
sport, right? Or I never play well on morning games, or this year with the team I have and the coach is really bad, and so I'm not playing well, right? Those are just like minor
Yeah.
examples, all the way up to major examples of like, every time I'm trying to qualify for a national team, I choke, right? Or the yips in golf, whatever term you want to use. But at the key of it is, working with the athlete to find the underpinning beliefs and factors that they believe are causing that, right? And then assess those. What's the validity and reliability of those? It's like, you know, let's use the I don't play well in morning
Mm.
games, right? It's like, well, when did that start? It's like, well, I had one morning game when I was 12 where I puked and I didn't play well. So now it's like, well, I mean, every 12-year-old is going to puke at some point from eating something crummy, or, has a bad game. But like, you don't know that the team of 12-year-olds you were playing, it's a U14 league, all those boys or gals had hit puberty already, and you were on the smaller end. And so now all of a sudden you have this belief that you play poorly in
Mm.
morning games.
Mm.
And when I explain it like that, it's like, well, that doesn't seem logical at all,
Yeah.
right? But once again, they have those anchor beliefs that are held there, right? And so you have to really kind of get to those underpinnings of what the beliefs are, because everybody, I would say that at least that I've talked to, maybe I'm biased because people come to me who have handled adversity, but I've probably coached at this point over 500 athletes, probably over 200 on the mental
Hmm.
performance side. And I haven't met a single person that hasn't had some level of adversity that they've had to
Yeah,
overcome.
yeah. You emphasize the idea of process-driven success over being purely results focused. Why is that shift so crucial, Brent?
Yeah, I think when we get into like truly process, and I talk about this like because it's hard in my sport,
Mm.
right? Like in track and field, you're defined by the
Yeah,
stopwatch, right?
yeah,
On the running
yeah.
side, let's say, right? And so that's really hard to like dissociate those two things, right? Because it's like I either make a team or I qualify or I do this based on the time. And I'm like, I got that,
Mm.
right? Like that's my job on the technical side as a coach, right? But what we find in the literature and what I find in practice is that those who have like the results first approach tend to like obsess, right? So they have that emotional roller coaster. This workout isn't good, that workout isn't bad. I'm not going to hit my goal. I am going to hit my goal, right? Which creates stress, worry, frustration, right? And then they start to feel these expectations, right? So in broad, they like end up in their
Mm.
head,
Mm.
right? But if you, which isn't very helpful. I do state though, at least in like my sport, where time is the deciding metric, so to speak, we have to respect that there's a time goal, right? But in the mindset approach, we have more joy. We flip the switch. We dial in and clarify our commitment, right? Our commitment to the process, because you're never going to show up to the start line, to the start of a game, whatever sport it is you play, and feel confident if you haven't practiced,
Yeah.
right? And so if you commit to the process, the practicing your mental skills, the going forward with that, right? Then you're going to have a better chance at the outcome, right? So it's kind of one of these little like, I don't want to say like tricks
Mm-hmm.
per se, but we know that if you focus on the process, the outcome tends to more likely take care of itself. Now, caveats obviously, are you doing the right training? Are you in the right environment? What's the weather like on race day? Is the team you're playing at the appropriate level for you? Like, if you're last in the NBA and you're playing whoever number one in the NBA is right now, right? Like, it's going to be
Mm.
very different. But if you're more evenly matched and such, right? So I think it's when you look at process, that can mean a lot of different things for people, right? And so in my world, when I say processes, is like showing up for practice, committing to the basics, working on your craft, right? Understanding that all those little things add up, right? And so it's one of those things where it's like easy to see, hard to do, right? Like we can all think of athletes who are process driven, like Kobe comes to mind, right? Or like I'm a Raptors fan, so Canadian,
Mm-hmm.
DeMar DeRozan
Mm-hmm.
really instilled that,
Mm.
right? And so that's when you see it, you go, oh, okay, man, like that guy's great. And it's like, yeah, but he spends time, like Kobe would read the ref book and find out the areas of gaps where the refs couldn't see
Yeah.
anything, so he could hand check and do more stuff, right? Like that's so insane on the process level that there's no way that guy's not going to be good,
Mm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about process, that's how we get to the outcome.
Yeah. Have you seen an example where focusing too much on the results, or like you said a few minutes ago, focusing on the stopwatch, and the stopwatch doesn't lie, but when it become an obsession, can that obsession hinder, let's say, results or hold an athlete back?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, if I mesh the two worlds of sports and clinical psychology here, if the numbers, let's say, or the outcome for a bigger term, become a part of your identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then the second you fail, it's a hit to your identity, not just you as a player, you as an athlete, right? And so when that comes in, ego comes in, right? Identity is pulled into different pieces, right? So you're going to feel hurt, you're going to feel angry, you're going to feel like you're not good enough, you're going to feel like a failure, right? So the example I always give in my sport when I'm talking to athletes is, they're out for a run and it's kind of a shoulder season, right? It's starting to turn to summer. They're not really heat adjusted and the heat's kicked up. And they're like, man, I suck. I couldn't run my pace. Everything felt horrible, right? I'm like, but you're not considering the variable heat, right? Because if I took you, like I'm in Flagstaff right now at 7,000 feet elevation, right? If I took you from sea level and brought you up to Flagstaff and said, go run, right? You'd be like, well, I can't run the same pace. There's altitude there, right? And so those are examples that I like to use because you can't just fixate on the numbers. You have to consider the variables, right? And so if you fixate on those numbers or you fixate on that outcome, but I take you from sea level and put you in a race in Flagstaff at 7,000 feet altitude and you fail because you decided to pace the same way you did at sea level, right? Well, Did your identity fail? Like, did you fail? Or did you just not consider the variables that would make you successful? Right. And so that's one, at least in the running sense, because we all know in running, we're slower at altitude. Right. So we let go of that number. We allow that identity to shift a little bit if we're going to altitude. Right. But we don't do that in other situations because we don't consider the variable. Right. And that's really hard, because if we've tied everything into the identity of like what my watch says, or did I win this game, right? Then there can't be another variable, because the only variable is, did the clock say this, or is the win-loss column or my point total this, right? But, you know, another example would be like, if you're a 14-year-old, and I see this a lot, I should score X amount of goals per game. I should be the top leader, and our team should always be winning, right? And it's like, okay, maybe, but like, what if I put you up against 18-year-olds? Do you still hold that belief to be true? No, probably not, right? Because the 18-year-olds are a foot taller than you, and if it's basketball, they're just going to swat every shot you take, right? And so if we can identify areas where that's not true, we can start to pull apart that identity. Be like, see, it doesn't have to be that way. We can consider different things. But if we don't do that, then it's just a win-loss. It's a binary. Did I win? Did I not? Did I hit goal? Did I not? Right? And that's where you're really going to have ruptures in what you're seeing as an identity or a persona, and really struggle to have any joy or consistent success across your support. And that's really what we want, is consistent success. Right?
And on that, when it comes to helping athletes, do you have a set of exercise or a strategy that you use often with athletes to help them focus on the process rather than scoreboard?
Yeah, a bit of both. Like, obviously have clinical frameworks where we're stealing from like cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, maybe DBT as well. But looking at the literature, there's things that come up time and time again, right? And so I have a framework that I kind of start as a basis when I'm looking at like runners in particular. That's a lot of my practice. And so it's called the IGNITE framework. And so essentially what you do is, the first thing you do is you identify your mental barriers, right? So like pinpointing the patterns such as self-doubt, perfectionism, fear of failure that keep you like from being your best, right? What's holding you back, right? And then the second piece, once we've done that, is, okay, we got it. We see what's holding you back here. We've picked it apart a little bit. And it's like, well, what are your best traits? So what strengths do you have? What are your powerful qualities? What gives you resilience? Even if you don't think you're super resilient, what gives you even this level of resilience, right? And within that, we start to develop what your competitive identity or persona is. You might have heard the term alter ego that Kobe used, right? The Black Mamba, that's the famous one, right? And so what we do with that is we start to go, who do you want to be on race day? Who do you want to show up as? What does that look like? What does that sound like? What does that feel like? How do you think when you're your competitive identity, right? And so if we can start to develop those things, now all of a sudden we have a mental framework of practice like you do in your technical skills, right? So if you're a soccer player, right? Maybe you start with mobility, maybe you start with dynamic warm up, and then you move to a jog, and then you move to keep up, right? There's a framework that you go through to get ready for your practices, right? And so this is just part 2 of it. I'll continue the rest of it, is start building that mental practice framework in the same way that you have your physical practice framework, right? So once we've got that competitive identity persona set forth, what we want to do is, what's your pre-performance routine? How are you getting ready? How are you turning on that identity? Because it's one thing to have an identity. It's another thing to be able to go, okay, this is how I turn it on, right? So what's that routine look like? So in this regard, this is where we start getting a little bit more personalized, right? So I had a marathoner, Masters woman racing last weekend, and she was asking about this. And I said, some women, they'll wear an extra hair elastic on their wrist just in case it breaks, right? While they're running. And so for them, as they're trying to get ready into their competitive identity, they might like snap their elastic once or twice. That's the physical cue to set up, right? And so that's how you start developing that routine. That's the little personal pieces, right? So what are you doing, or what can you do that gives you that calm, that focus, that consistency to be like, okay, now I'm in my competitive identity. So once you have those things, we might work on like an adjacent piece where it's like, what's your reset routine? So if things go sideways, right? So if you're in, let's say, a marathon, I'm going to use lots of running examples because that's what I do. And you have to go to the bathroom, and you stop off, you jump in a porta-john, and you go, right? A lot of people go, my race is ruined, my times are off, I'm never going to get there, my goal's screwed, I'm only 7 miles in, why bother, right? And it's like, well, hold on, we can reset back into that competitive
Mm-hmm.
identity, right? So we'll create a technique and a tool around that. So that way, yeah, maybe you did lose a minute doing that, right? Maybe your goal was, let's say, 3 hours or 3:30
Yeah.
or something. But I'd take a 3:31 with a bathroom break because you came back into that competitive identity than giving up and running 3:45 and wondering what if. So that goes into the next piece, right? How do we instill focus under pressure? Because that's a pressure situation. All of a sudden, your goal, everything you worked for, like in the marathon, you train for 12, 16 weeks for one day, right? That's a bit of pressure, right? So now we're developing a bit of a ability to work under pressure. So how can we stay grounded? How do we become adaptable? So like, I'll give you an example. I raced last weekend in a half marathon and it was supposed to be a little bit cooler. Show up to race day, a little hotter, right? So that affects performance. Finished my warm up 15 minutes out from the start time. They go, sorry, there's a backup on the highway. We're going to delay the race time 15 minutes. I'm like, at first I'm like, oh my God, I got, I already done my warm up. I'm ready. My sweats are off. I'm good to go. Right. And then I remember, okay, I can do this. I know how to do it. I can be adaptable. What do I got to do to change this? What's the routine? Right. So that's the big piece of the core of the framework. And then what you have to do is you have to recognize, just like your technical practice, you train this daily. Right. So when I'm working with athletes, there's little tips and tools that I want them to practice that week, depending on where they're at. Maybe they've got a big tournament. Maybe they've got a big race. Maybe they're just in base training, or maybe they're playing indoors right now, and outdoors is their, kind of main practice in terms of like futsal and outdoor soccer or something, right? So we want to train those skills daily, which brings us to the last piece, which is evaluate and grow, right? So if we evaluate and grow, what we're doing is we're checking in. How did that process work? Did I like that tool? Did I like that technique? Do I need to shift that a little bit, right? Maybe that works for me in the winter, but it doesn't work for me in the summer. And so it's always an iterative process, right? So that reflective evaluation piece is the secret weapon for continuous improvement to get you to figure out why you were successful and then try to be more successful more often, but then also bounce back from setbacks, because we're all going to have them across the board. So, in short, that's really like, I'll give you the whole kind of breakdown. It's, identify your mental barriers, generate your best traits, nurture your performance routine, instill focus under pressure, train your skills daily, evaluate and grow after every performance. So that's the broad framework that I work through with athletes.
Yeah. No, lovely. Brant, like you said, it doesn't matter which sport, there is always variables. It doesn't matter how well you prepare for a race, for an event, and you try to minimize let's say some worst case scenario. You highlighted, for example, if you have to run a marathon and you plan for a warmer conditions that day, then you have a cooler conditions, and so on and so forth. But what's your approach? And we see this quite often with some athletes at the top level, where quite often they develop this mindset of negativity. Like every time they don't reach their goals or they don't perform, they develop this mindset where they need always to find, let's say, to blame something else, And then I've seen it all the time. What advice would you give coaches or even athletes to try to switch or change that mindset?
Yeah, I think it's a big question. I'll try and unpack it in a couple of ways here. I think environment matters too, right? So do you have the right people around you that are, willing to call you on your stuff sometimes too, right? Because oftentimes what I find when we're around like really high level people, the ones who aren't so great at mindset surround themselves with people that just agree with them no matter what, so they can get away with whatever, right? The great mindset athletes surround themselves with the people who challenge them, right? And you can look at this in business, you can look at this in sport, right. It's the same thing, right? And so that's a big part of it, right? Like if I didn't have, mentors in coaching and mental performance that were like, Brant, I don't think that idea is the right one. Maybe you should shift that, right? And I wasn't, making sure I surround myself with those people so I can be the best that I'm going to be. And I just wanted to have people who are like, oh yeah, Brant, you're awesome. Just do that, just do that, just do that, right? Well, the outcome's probably not going to be that great. But I think too, this is where you have to blend in the psychological and understand, like, okay, what's their personality traits like, right? Like, is this just part of their personality? And if it is, okay, how do we work on that? Because everybody has different personality traits. I like to think of it as, like a dimmer, right? If you've got a light switch dimmer, you can go up and down, right? Sometimes it's appropriate to have that personality trait low. Sometimes it's appropriate to have that personality trait high, right? So if you're working in the morning in the room next door to bedroom and your partner's still in bed, you want that dimmer on low, right? You want to be considerate, right? That they're still sleeping, right? At night, you're both working on the laptops. You want that dimmer high because it's dark, right? So that's the same thing with personality traits, right? And so even that like blame or negativity, yeah, it's sometimes fair to blame the refs. They sometimes suck, right? And other times you just got to turn that down. I think Steve Kerr, Golden State Warriors coach, is a master of this, right? You very rarely see him blow up. But when he does, it tends to have some substance, right? And it tends to carry some weight because it's like, this guy's like pretty calm all the time, right? So when he blows up, something must have happened. And he puts that back to his players. So I look at it when I'm working with athletes who have that negative mindset of, I get it. Like, we're all negative sometimes. That happens. But what you really have is a problem where you can't decide when to turn it up and down. It's always on up, right? So it's like, how do we work with you to change that dimmer, right? Because what we know is when we take ownership, when we have autonomy, when we have agency, that's when our performance is highest. But in the negative sphere of an athlete, it's your fault. Coach didn't prepare me. Refs suck. The race went out too fast. So that screwed me over. Yeah. It's like, well, in all those things, you had choices you could have done differently. You might not believe me right now, and that's fine, but the evidence bears out that you did. Yeah. Right. And so if we can work on that and go, hey, let's try this a different way. Hey, how is that negativity harming your performance? That's a question athletes don't like to answer. It's like, you ask a basketball player. I'm a big Raptors fan. So for years, they're harping on the refs, right? And then they're chewing at the refs, and the other team goes down on a 5-on-4 and scores. It's like that negativity just cost you a basket on the defensive end that you now have to make up on the offensive end. And so when you ask that athlete the questions at first, like, it doesn't harm me at all. It's all that. It's like, well, I'll give you an example like that where you just got harmed. And so that's a really hard question to answer. And the athletes who truly want to get better hate that question. Yeah. Because the truth of it really sucks. It hits them hard, right? But that's where you grow, right? So that's why it's such a good question.
Yeah. How do you tailor your coaching approach when working with someone chasing an Olympic dream versus someone running their first 5K?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is understanding their goals and what like their why is, right? So, if I'm meeting with new athletes and somebody's like, hey, I just want to run my first 5K or run my first marathon and I just want to check it off the bucket list. That's my goal. I love it, right? I want to know that so I can be the best coach, right? Versus if I have somebody who's coming and say, hey, I'm trying to make 2028 games. I'd like to talk to you about coaching. It's like, well, that's a different conversation because now there's expectations both ways. And so you have to set the stage for that. So, if I'm working with a high level person who's come to me, whether it's on the mental performance side or the coaching side, it goes, you might not like me sometimes, but if you trust that I have your best interests in mind, we'll get through it. Right. And, tailored, might be different, right? Both people require communication. Both people require education as they're going through, right? It's just sometimes the stakes are a little higher, right? So as an example, it's super snowy, kind of where I am right now. And so athletes are like moving workouts and, we're moving around easy runs and all that stuff, right? For the Olympic bound athlete, it might be like, we actually do need to hit this today because of the rest recovery cycles for you. So I need you to hit the treadmill, right? For the beginner who's looking to get in the 5K where it's a little bit more, you're just improving with every step you take. It's like, hey, we can just do an easy run today. It's totally okay. Don't sweat it, right? And so I want to be clear. I'm not coddling or thinking lesser of that person, but all coaching, whether it's at the entry level or the high performance level, is about what do we do to take the next logical step from where you are to make a performance gain, right? And so for this person just starting out, just running, low-hanging fruit. We could just run today and get better. It doesn't even have to be a workout, right? But for this high performance person, they need a little bit more structure, proper loading cycles, et cetera, because we're talking about like small percents here of gain, right? So a lot of that individualization is just recognizing where they're at, where their gaps are, what the next step is.
Well, from a volume point of view, an elite athlete, especially someone that is chasing an Olympic dream, usually train around 42 hours a week, depending on the goal they set that month or the event they have, or let's say pre-qualifying event to win their tickets to be selected. So it's a bit complicated just for the listeners to understand. But from mental preparation to boost that motivation, to get them achieve those milestones prior the day, maybe the approach or the methodology is slightly similar.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some personality differences, right? So some examples I've seen over the years is like, I've seen athletes go to training groups or training camps or something that are very strict and very regimented, right? And they're the type of person that has to have fun in their life to be performing at a high level, right? I think that the best case example of like the nimbleness of this is if you look back at the 90s Bulls, right? So you've got Michael Jordan, like insane, crazy, right? We all watch The Last Dance. He's nutty, obviously, right? And then Phil Jackson is like this whisperer guy, philosophical guy, somehow reins in Jordan. And then they bring in Dennis Rodman, right? And Dennis Rodman says, I need a break mid-season. And Jordan's like, what do you mean you need a break? I'm doing all this stuff here. I just need you to get a rebound. And what does Phil Jackson do? He recognizes that Rodman's the guy that keeps this team together. And if we need him in the playoffs, and he says he needs a break because he's a guy who needs joy, right? And fun. Now, we can argue about the ways in which he got joy and had fun, right? But that's what makes that guy tick, right? And so Jackson was smart enough to go, Jordan needs this, Rodman needs this. And so I think that's the same way we have to look at athletes when they're trying to reach their pinnacle, right? Some of them need that regimented, super focused, disciplined. This is what I do. This is what I do. This is what I do. I can leave my family for 6 months and train at altitude or go away to national team training camps. Doesn't matter. I'm fine. I'm hard, right? And then others need to have their family around, need to have that joy, need to have that fun in their life, have a good social group around them, right? And so the key for coaching and teams is to identify what those athletes need, right? So especially in team sports, right? That's why I love the Bulls example. Jordan needed that, but Jordan also needed Pippen and Rodman, right? And so Jackson was smart enough to go, I know Pippen needs this, I know Rodman needs this, I know Jordan needs this, because no one of those guys wins a championship. The collective of the team wins a championship. And so if you're not looking after all of your athletes' needs in terms of what they need to be successful, you're not really coaching. You're just putting forward a training plan or a practice plan.
And on that, how do you help or support or guide coaches on fostering an environment where athletes feel comfortable and even feel comfortable discussing struggles?
Yeah, so, it can be hard, right? Because there's inherently a power dynamic between coaches and athletes. And I think the best coaches break down that power dynamic. Like, obviously, the coaches still have to make decisions. There's subs, there's starting lineups, there's, all those things. There's that part, obviously, right? But the best coaches break it down where they can have a relationship where they can talk to athletes 1v1, right? About whatever's going on. And so when I'm talking to coaches, it helps that I've got the technical acumen. I'm not just this like mental performance guy who's never coached at a high level. I can say, this is what I did in my practice and this was the success we had, right? But I look at it and I go, you have to create openness, right? Because if your athletes are scared to talk to you, if they're scared to tell you what's going on, then you're not getting the best version of them. And ultimately, as a coach, your job is to get the best version of your athletes, whether it's an individual sport or a team sport, to win, right? Now, I believe there's way more lessons that we get from sport and there's way more things on top of winning, but that's the job essentially, especially as you move up the ranks of performance, right? And what the top coaches know is that it's a person-centered approach, right? So if you look at kind of the best framework in sport, it's athlete-centered, coach-led, expert-driven, right? And so the athletes are at the center always. So it's what do they need, right? Now the coaches, they're going to make the technical decisions, practice, right? But sometimes you need to do that and consult with athletes. Like I said, there's athletes who are like, just give me the plan. I don't care. I'll do it. I'll put my head down and I'll go, right? And there's athletes who are like, I'm feeling a little off today. Can we talk about it? Maybe adjust, right? And the coach has got to synthesize all that information, right? And that's where, mental performance coach and experts like myself can come in and talk to coaches, be like, hey, you got an athlete like this. If you really want to make them tick, maybe they're the Rodmans who need a vacation, right? And maybe you got this athlete who's a Jordan. And the problem is Jordans don't like Rodmans a lot of time in team stuff, right? So as coaches, you have to be able to put that forward and go, look, you might not like the work ethic of this person, and you might think this person's insane with their work ethic, right? That's fine to have those different, to have those cultural pieces that we think are different, but we got to do it together to be a team.
It's funny, you're referencing all the time the Bulls, the Chicago Bulls, and the persona. And I mean, the majority have seen the fantastic documentary on Netflix. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. And it was great.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
Yeah, it was great. And whoever you talk to, they say, but these guys, they have strong egos and things like that, But then you talk, Brant, about the concept of we go instead of ego in teams. Just for our listeners, can you explain that and how it improves performance?
Yeah, so I'll kind of identify some of the terms here first, but like an ego we all have, right?
Mm.
This is what I think of myself. This is who I
It's
think I
natural.
am. This is how I want to play, right? And it's natural.
Mm.
We all
Yeah.
have it, right? And so what we want as a team is we want to form that, right? And we don't want to be a collection, let's say it's a basketball roster of 15
Mm.
athletes, right? We don't want one ego here and one ego here and one ego here. They're all pulling in different directions, right? We want a WeGo that's all driving the bus in the same
Mm-hmm.
direction, as I mix metaphors horribly here. And so the WeGo is something I look at when talking to teams. It's like, what do we value? What do we want? What do we want to achieve? How do we want to achieve it? How do our pieces fit together? How do we know when I'm doing the right thing for the team, not just for myself, right? And so, if you listen to players, it was this great quote, I'm going to butcher it, by the Eagles Super Bowl coach. It was something along the lines of like, you achieve more together.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they just took down Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, supposed to be this dynasty, best, team ever. Right. And the coach immediately after, tears in his eyes, pumped that he won, obviously. And his response is like, we achieve more together. Right. And that's the definition of WeGo. We came together. We as a team came together to achieve more than we could have just Jalen Hurts, their quarterback, deciding to throw exactly what he wanted. Right. And so when I introduce that concept to teams, there's a little bit of pushback at first, because it's like, well, I'm the number one option, so things run through me, right? It's like, that's great, but you're not winning 82 games if it's an NBA season. You're not winning NFL playoffs. You're not winning, the World Cup in soccer, just you. Because if you are, man, let's take everyone else off the field to play, and you go right ahead. Go do it. Go win. Win me a championship. Prove me wrong. And so while you might be the most talented person on the field, and maybe the most offensively talented or defensively talented, depending on your sport, and the demands, it doesn't matter. You still have to have a team, right? And so you're a part of it, absolutely, right? But everybody's a part of it. So we develop that WeGo rather than an ego. What do we as a team do? What do we as a team look for? What do we as a team dictate as success, right? And so if we can do that, that then trickles down to everybody in the team. They all know their place. They all know what they're supposed to do. They all know the action that they want to do. They all know what success looks like, right? So I think it's a really cool concept that's really fun when you get buy-in for that, because now you get players holding each other accountable. Hey, we decided this was our WeGo. This is what we decided we were supposed to do, right? And coaches can go, this is the value system we have. This is what we have, right? So like the Miami Heat are a great example of that. Heat culture. That's what they have, right? So like they're always drafting players that nobody thinks is going to be good and come out and they're amazing, right? Because their culture, this is our value. This is what we want, right? And then they're always good. The Heat are always really good. And that's because they have this, they probably don't use this term, but they have this WeGo culture, their Heat culture, they call it.
Can you share a technique or strategy that helps an athlete to calm their nerves prior a big event?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing to do is accept that you're going to have nerves. So this would be acceptance and commitment therapy, technically, right? So like there's no athlete, when I talk to high performers, who don't have some level of nerves going into it, because it means something. And so for some athletes, let's take my sport and endurance sport, some of those nerves is, I just know how much I'm going to hurt for the next 30 minutes or 2 hours, or whatever the length of the event is, right? And so those nerves are there. Absolutely. We can't just be like, nope, no nerves. You're not going to have them. Just get rid of them. Don't think about them. Like that's not going to work. We have to accept that they're there. And then what I try to do is educate from a physiological level that sometimes those nerves are actually prepping our body, right? That's the flight or fight response. Well, sport is fighting, right? Maybe not fist fighting, right? But it's fighting against an opponent, right? And so your body's preparing. So we don't want to shut that down and be like, I never want that. I don't need it. It doesn't serve me. Let's think about the ways it does serve us, right? Because what happens is we're taught generally quite young, nerves are bad. You never want to be nervous. Don't be nervous, right? So now all of a sudden we have a negative connotation when we feel those nerves. We go, oh my God, I'm not going to perform well because I'm nervous, right? It's like, but if we flip that script a little bit and we use some actual good science to say that those nerves actually help your body prepare, right? And that this is what everyone experiences, even at the highest levels. I've talked to athletes on the Olympic start line. He's like, oh my God, I'm nervous, right? Some people it's a lot, some people it's little, right? And so if we can reshift and reframe what we think of that, now all of a sudden it doesn't hold us back. We just go, this is a normal part of the process. I accept it's going to be there, but I'm going to commit to not letting it drive me, right? So if you've ever driven in snow with a partner who's scared of driving in snow, right? you want this understanding that you're not going to talk to me about your fears and nerves right now because I need to focus on the road, right? And if you're telling me about that transport and that car and that snow, and I'm letting fear and nerves drive me and make my decisions, I'm going to crash for sure, right? But if I'm sitting there and I'm focused and I accept that this is a nerve-wracking situation, right? But I go, that's not going to drive me. I'm going to focus on the things I control. Where's the snow? How far away am I staying away from vehicles? What space am I keeping in between? I have a higher likelihood of being successful, right? It's the same thing here on the sports side.
Yeah.
Don't let fear and nerves be the driver. You're the driver.
Yeah. What's your take on athletes using visualization or mindfulness techniques in preparation?
I love it. I think we sometimes do it incorrectly. We overcomplicate it. I think visualization can be really helpful. I think when athletes tend to do it, when they talk to me, they like run this like big movie of this like big, amazing game-saving play. If you're a goalie or, winning on a shootout, they make it big and grandiose, right? I think we should break it down and make it really short, but detailed. And then that's how it becomes more effective. And we see this in the literature. So the 3 questions that I ask athletes when I'm working on imagery, visualization, whatever term you want to use is, what do I see, right? So I ask players all the time, what's your vantage point when you're using imagery? So if it's a soccer pitch, are you watching yourself like you'd watch a game on TV? Are you watching yourself from on top and seeing how you play, like it's pool table? Or are you watching yourself like through first person, right? Because that's important, right? Because we want to make sure the rest of that imagery is through whatever lens you look at, right? So what do I see? How do I see it, right? And then what do I do, right?
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? Like for you, like depending on your sport, right? And then how do I feel? We want to attach the emotion to the feeling, right? And if we can do that, it tends to stick a lot better, right? So we want to keep it short and concise, and then we want to have multiple visualizations and imagery. So I was talking to a soccer player, a midfielder, the other day, and he's got an attack image, a mid image, and a back image, right? This is how I want to play in the back. This is what I want it to look like, feel like, what I do. This is what it's in the middle. This is what it is when I'm on the attack. Because we want him visualizing those different parts of his game, right? So like with a track runner, let's say running the 1500, 3 3/4 laps, we might have a different image for each lap. And then we might have a different image for each way that the race could go out, right? If it's a slow race, if it's a fast race, if it's tactical, right? If it slows down, right? So creating short but detailed images and then having multiple ones that you can pull from that tie the behavior, the action to the emotion become really effective.
Yeah. No, it's this topic really fascinates me all the time, especially in high-paced sports or where the speed is a key. For example, downhill slalom skier or motorsports where prior to the start they take 1 minute, 1.5 minutes just to visualize the course, to remember the turns, to remember what to do. And based on, let's say, if there is a crosswind or if the wind is too strong and things like that. And like you said, quite often I ask athletes, what do you see? Seriously, if you can just explain, what do you see? What are you trying to memorize, to remember, or probably to change from an early preparation strategy to probably something that you might change in 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. So it's really interesting. And to do that, when you talk to them or when you see them, they are really calm, and then I go back to my first question. Prior the green light or prior the start, you have the nerves starting to build, And some of the athletes, you see them like, and even in gymnastics and athletics as well, we've seen it quite often. So you see them in their corner sitting, probably with a headset, listening to music or whatever, but they are in that calm tempo, trying to visualize. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that the one key component to this is that everybody may do it differently. And so even though, like, that's why I said, ask the question of, how do you view yourself? Is it from the side? Is it from the top? Is it the first person, right? And some people need to be walking when they do it. Some people need to be listening to music when they do it, right? Some people need to be silent and away from other humans when they do it, right? And as coaches, as teammates, as mental performance coaches like myself, we need to respect that, right? Because if that's what gets you into the optimal arousal state and the optimal zone, man, go do that, because
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
want you to
Yeah.
perform, right? I'm not going to tell you shouldn't do
Hmm.
that as long as it's not detrimental, right? And I think that's the key where we sometimes miss it is we look for these prescriptive hacks where it has to be this way and boom, 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 boom. But it's like we're all different humans, right? Sometimes, I know for racing, sometimes like I like to be alone and away from people. And then sometimes, depending on how the race is and how I'm feeling, I want to be near people at the start when I'm visualizing and getting going, right? And so giving your athletes or your teams that freedom to have some of that individuality can be really
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah. You've worked with both team sports athletes and those in individual disciplines. What are the biggest mental challenges in each?
I think belief in self is a big
Hmm.
one, right? Like, and you'd be shocked. Like, you see these big giant football players that tower over you. They're massive humans, and they're like, I don't know if I'm good enough. And it's like, dude, you throw people for a living on the offensive line. Like, I don't understand how you're concerned, right? Like, that's kind of the gist of it. But I think belief in self is a big
Hmm.
one, and then learning to navigate at different levels, right? So where I oftentimes will get athletes coming to see me is when they're moving up to another level, right? So maybe they're going from U12, U14 to U16, which might be rep,
Hmm.
right? Or if it's a draft eligible sport, right? Or if it's soccer, their rights are being bought or whatever it is, right? In Europe. And so they know like football is football, soccer is soccer, basketball is basketball. You put the ball in the hoop, or you kick the ball in the net, or you try and score a
Hmm.
touchdown, right? Running 25 laps around in a circle is 25 laps around the circle, whether it's college or the Olympic level. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
But I have this saying where it's like new level, new devil, right? So you might know it's 25 laps. All I got to do is run 25 laps in a row, right? But what you don't realize is now the packs are tighter. It's a little bit more strategic. It's a little bit more sit and kick. There's a little bit more shoving, right? So that's a new devil that you never had to contend with at the level, right? Or let's use like soccer, right? So you're going from U16 to U18,
Hmm.
right? Well, now all of a sudden on the guy side, maybe every guy you're playing against has hit puberty. So their shoulders are this big, they're this tall, they're quicker, they're faster, they shove a little bit more. Or in my national sport, hockey, I think it's at 16, roughly, depending on your
Yeah.
league, the hitting
Yeah.
starts, right? Hockey's still hockey. Pass the puck, put it in the net, defend, don't let them put it in the net,
Hmm.
right? But all of a sudden you have this new devil to contend with, which is hitting. And so that's a problem I see all the time. They're like, I was really good last year and now I'm not. It's like, well, it's not that you're not good. You just have a new devil that you've never contended with. And when we frame it that way, it's like, oh, this is just another skill I need to develop, right? It's just another devil I need to challenge. I've already conquered all these devils at this level. But as at every level you go up, there's a new devil you got to
Yeah.
challenge, right? And so that's where I see a lot of people where they lose their confidence, what they think is their confidence, because all of a sudden they suck. It's like, you don't suck. You're just technically not proficient at that skill set that's required at
Mm.
that level. That's okay. You're not supposed to be. You're developing, right? That's why we move up the
Yeah.
ranks. That's why we don't send high schoolers to the pro
Yeah.
leagues, right? So that's what I see a lot of the
Yeah.
time with
Yeah.
athletes.
What's the common mistake you see coaches make when it comes to athlete psychology?
Uh, a lot. One, that you should just try harder. Two, that fixating and telling people not to make mistakes. That's the big one. Like, we don't play with mistakes. Like, what do you mean? Like, at what level in any sport does anybody not make
Mm.
mistakes? So a tool I'll use for that when I'm dealing with athletes who have coaches like that is like, pick your sport. Say it's hockey. Let's
Hmm.
say you're a fan of a certain player. Watch them for an entire game. And remember, best players in the world, best coaches, best support staff, best sports psych, best physio, best teammates, right? They make mistakes, right? So how is it that you at your like U16 league, that coach thinks you're not going to make mistakes? Like, give your head a shake, coach, right? Like, they're developing athletes. They're going to make
Hmm.
mistakes. And what we know is if you treat it as a fail forward opportunity rather than a fail and you get benched opportunity, your athletes are going to grow. Your athletes are going to develop. And we need to remember that most of us are working at the developmental level, right? So we want developing athletes so when they get to the next level, they're developed, right? Now, if I go back to what I just said about new level, new devil, right? If you have a coach at the U14 level who says, we don't make mistakes, and if you make a mistake, you're benched. How do they know to handle mistakes when they get to the U16
Hmm.
level, which are going to happen?
Hmm.
So that coach just set them up for failure.
Hmm.
And now all of a sudden you're coming to see me because your confidence is shot. You suck. You're not good enough. You're afraid of making mistakes. So you played hesitant, you play tentative, you don't like play free and fast and flowing, right? It's like, well, that's your old coach's problem. So that's the one I see a lot.
And on that, let's use as an example what happened last Super Bowls between the Eagles and the Chiefs.
Yep.
The majority here in Europe believe that the Chiefs will win, you know?
Yep. I did too. I was still waiting in the fourth quarter when the game was clearly over.
And it was this hype building, you know, Patrick Mahomes and things like that. I mean, it's from a spectacle, from spectator, from a fan base point of view, it's quite interesting and it's fantastic. But then the minute the game started, you could feel and see that the Eagles there were absolutely in a different league. Defense-wise, offense, they were, you know, when you are defeated at that level, with all the pressure, with all the expectations, from a psychology point of view, how do you rally the entire team based on each individual to put everything behind and to start building some kind of motivation to look for the next season?
Yeah, that's a big question. I've thought about this watching that game, and I think I'm sure the Chiefs have somebody way smarter than me that they're working with, so they don't need to listen to my advice, I suppose. But one of the things I would look at, and you know, kind of like watching, I'm not a giant football fan, but you know, I listen to sports stuff and kind of think things through a lot, is that I think what we're going to come to find in kind of the, you know, post-mortem of this is when you look at the way the Eagles played all year, nobody said they could win because their style of play offensively didn't work, right? And so when you look at that, it's like, okay, Jalen Hurts is this not throwing quarterback. He's this rushing quarterback who's got Saquon Barkley, who's this big rusher. That's not supposed to work at the NFL level. But that's what they say. I'm not an expert, but that's what I've heard. And so I think what we're going to find is anytime the game advances, no matter what the sport is, right? You can think of basketball with the three-point revolution, like Steph Curry and them started, right? It's like they destroyed everyone because it was a brand new style of play, right? And the major leagues are a copycat league, every single one of them, right? Like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Steve Kerr, they go out and do that. What happens? Everybody else starts loading up on three-point shooters, and we start, or Caitlin Clark, right? Exactly. Like, which is, you know, so every league is a copycat league. So I think part of what my kind of synopsis would be on that first would be like, where were we technically behind, right? Because, you know, football is a territorial sport, right? And what I mean by that is like the goal is to take the territory from the other person, right? You're trying to move into their territory to score, right? And so with that, it doesn't matter how mentally tough you are if technically you're not putting people in the right position. So I would first look at it from that perspective. So having been a coach who's lost in championships and stuff, I look at it from this framework, and I steal this from the book. I can't remember the author, but it's Coaching Better Every Season. And it's like, let's do a post-mortem of what went well and what went wrong. Where are we behind? Where are we not up to date? What are we missing? Right? That's what I would do if I was the Chiefs organization. It's like, where did we not see the gaps that we had to this new offensive model? Right? Because really, like defensive model for the Eagles. The defensive model was insane. Like I think I saw a stat where they didn't blitz once, but they had almost an NFL record in sacks. It's like, that doesn't make sense. Right? So there's something going on there at a technical level that's different that maybe they haven't seen or weren't prepared for. Okay, do we have the personnel for that type of style of play? Right? Because even if you look at like Brady's evolution, right? I think it was first they were really defensive line, right? That's what won them their first couple. And then they bring in like Gronk and everybody and they become an offensive juggernaut, right? And so I think that's what you're going to see here with the Chiefs is they were just behind on playing against this new defense, right? Like one of the other stats that came out of the NFL was this was the biggest defensive line in NFL history at the Super Bowl. I think the average weight was like 336 pounds and 6'9". Like that's insane. You think about the size of those humans, right? And now Mahomes is trying to look over and move in the space those guys take up, right? I know I'm going to the technical here, but you have to assess that first, right? And so then I'd come back and go, okay, we lost. That sucks. Own it, right? And I think Mahomes did a really good interview on this. Where he's like, it wasn't up to my standards, right?
was quite
He took it on his chin. Quite good. And so you look at all those things and go, this is a team sport, right? Kudos to him. He's the leader. He's the quarterback, right? Not my standard. And if you look at it arguably, you'd be like, that wasn't a Mahomes game, right? Interceptions, all this stuff, right? It's not how he plays. But I would look at it and go, okay, we lost. We're going to own that. We're going to accept that we lost. We're going to commit to making changes, right? And we're going to rebuild from this, right? And so if you look at on the opposite side, Jalen Hurts lost 2 years ago to this very team. The first thing I saw an interview with him, the first thing he said after being quiet for quite some time that night to one of his assistant coaches is, I'll be back and we'll be back. So he accepted the loss and committed to doing the things it takes to get back there again. It took him 2 years. They had a rough year last year, first round loss in the playoffs, right? But he committed to doing the right things. That team committed to doing the right things. That team committed to putting the right players in the right places, right? They signed Barkley this year on a 1 year. That worked out really well, right? And so that's really at the root of what you're doing is acceptance and commitment. I accept. We lost. We sucked. That's what Mahomes did, right? But he's going, I commit to get better. I'm not going to let that happen again. The same way Jalen Hurts did 2 years ago against the same team. So that's at the root, I would start of it. And then I would, that's from a team kind of process level. And then individually, I'd be talking to each athlete and go, where are you at? What do you think you did great? What are your gaps? Where's your gap analysis and performance plan for this summer, both mental and physical, right? And I want to give credit though. Like I was watching Mahomes and I was thinking through this lens, like, man, you're down, what was it, like 44 something, right? In the fourth quarter or end of third quarter, right? And this guy's still trying to throw bombs even though he's been picked off. Like that's the level of mental resilience. He didn't just give up and go, I'm just going to put side passes and do some rushing and try not to lose more yards and have the score blown up even more. He goes, no, I'm going for it. That's what he did. You watch, he threw bombs. A couple of them got picked, whatever, right? But I think that's a really cool thing to look at. Even when he was losing, I'm still trying. I accept we're losing, but it doesn't matter. I'm committing to do the right thing in this play, in this moment. And I think that's a true sign of where his kind of leadership and mental resiliency is.
That example, when there is a defeat like that, everyone turns to the coach, and quite often the majority blame the coach. And we forget that coaches are a human being. How do you help coaches manage their own stress and in those similar situations, probably to, let's say, to avoid to take it really personally and deep, and probably it can lead to a burnout?
Yeah, I remember, I'll give you a funny story here. I remember seeing a panel of track and field coaches, and it was throws coaches, javelin, shot put, discus. And I think between them, they had something like 10 Olympic medals at the time. It was 3 or 4, I think it was 4 coaches. But between them, they also had 6 divorces, right? And so that's the pressure that high performance sport, because you're all in, right? And so when you're all in, you are going to take things critically, right? But like, so once again, I'm sure Andy Reid is far smarter than I am when it comes to football and what the needs are. But I would look at that and go, what areas is my coaching staff? Because remember, football's a coaching staff, right? It's not an individual coach, right? What areas in my coaching staff can we get better? Is that new personnel? Is that upskilling personnel? Like, what is that, right? Once again, that comes back to the technical side first. You have to assess, where did we go wrong? What play calls did we make wrong? What personnel do we have wrong? Like, I could have the best technical ability in the world as a coach. Let's say I'm coaching U16 basketball. Best plays, I've got them all trained up, they're super fit, right? If I put them against a college team like Duke, doesn't matter the technical ability, I don't have the personnel on the floor to play against Duke, right? So I think those are the layers you have to look through first. There has to be radical ownership,
Absolutely.
right? Like maybe I missed plays, maybe I didn't make the right calls, et cetera, right? But you have to look at it as a system, because high performance sport is a system. And so, I tell people, having been in the high performance, coaching world, trying to get people on teams and stuff, you don't realize what all goes into, like, I'll say marathon running as an example, right? Trying to get like agents and coaches and race organizers to let your athlete in, to get bottles, to get to the right race that has the right amount of points, to, hopefully it has the right weather. And if not, what's your backup plan? What do the 12 weeks look like? And how do you get them to an altitude camp beforehand? Everybody just sees the 20XX on the board. They go, hey, they did it or they didn't. It's like, you don't understand. Then you're dealing with national sport organizations. You're dealing with Olympic standards that are moving. You're dealing with, how are you top X in your country to get into the slots, right? That's all the like context behind the decisions that are being made, right? And so I think on the football example, I'm a fan of sport. I watch sport. I understand it from a mental performance level and a coaching level in running, but I don't know all the context that's going on behind, like the system of high performance football. And so I think that's what we as fans sometimes do, incorrectly is we simplify it. We go, that's the reason
Mhm.
there, therefore solve the
Mhm.
reason. It's like, we got no clue
Or
what's going on in
or
the background,
yeah,
right?
or
Like,
worse. I mean, okay, as a fan, because we love the team, we follow the team. So I give credit to fans to criticize because they love the team. They are connected with
sure.
the team. It's in their
Yeah,
blood.
they pay the
But
bills.
then when you have the
Yeah,
media, sports media, trying to understand and figure out what went wrong, what they missed, what they didn't read in regards to the other team, the other opponent, and stuff like that. And most of the time they cross the line. I'm talking about the media, you know, because it
yeah, yeah.
doesn't matter how you're gonna turn and twist or speculate, you know, there is no way. And quite frankly, in European football, soccer, the media play a huge role for the management to sack the coach. You know,
Yep.
it's sad. I don't think it's the case in the American football in the U.S., but yeah, it.
Yeah, I think coaches more so now than ever have to be like, and athletes too, have to be great at everything. And I respect that media being involved is the way in which these athletes in sport make money. Without the TV rights, there's no
Yeah,
money,
absolutely. Yeah,
basically,
yeah.
right? Can't sell commercials, right? So I get that. But let's say you just went through like one of the biggest losses of your career and I shove a microphone in your face. Do you think you're going to have fully reflective, formulated sentences that are going to be correct, right? And I think that's where they can do a bit of a disservice. Like, I get it. You want to have that post, game soundbite or
Mm.
whatever it is, but it's really hard from a psychological level to deal with a loss and go, okay, 5 minutes have passed. This is the biggest loss I've lost on the stage. There's the media. I'm a relatively famous person. I'm going to be called out. I'm going to be on radio shows. I'm going to be on TV networks about all my decisions, dissected by people who've never done what I've done. And now somebody's going to stick a mic in my face and ask me to have a fully formulated opinion as to what went wrong. It's like nobody's going to be successful in that situation.
No, no. Great. Now it's time for our lightning round.
Okay.
Let's do it. Coffee or tea?
Yep.
Coffee.
Yeah.
Favorite book or movie?
Ooh, favorite movie. I like I have like a tie, so it'd be like The Big Short and Moneyball.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's a tie.
Morning run
Yeah.
or evening run?
Morning, get it done. Enjoy the sunset or sunrise. Sorry,
Running in a dry day, dry weather, or wet?
dry all the time. Yeah.
One historical figure you'd have dinner with?
Ooh, that's a good one. A historical figure that I'd have dinner with. That's a tough one. I would trying to think who that would be because that's a hard one. I'm going to come back to that one. I'm going to skip it
Okay,
and come back
no
because I'll have a
worries.
better answer.
Worst career advice you ever received?
Worst career advice. Oh yeah. Follow your passion.
Mm-hmm. Go strategy to unwind after a tough day or a long week?
Coffee and a run with my wife and dog.
Mm-hmm. Favorite travel destination?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would have to say Italy.
Italy. If I ask why, is it weather or food?
Both.
Uh, a personal mantra or a quote you live by?
Just start.
Mm-hmm. If you weren't a coach or therapist, what would you be doing?
Oh, I would probably be working in rehab, so like musculoskeletal rehab.
Okay. Favorite sport outside track and field?
Basketball.
Mm-hmm. Women basketball or men or both?
Both. Like watching the last couple of years, like Sabrina Ionescu and Caitlin Clark come up, and then there's a young woman from my hometown that I had the pleasure of crossing paths with in track and field, Aaliyah Edwards, who's just crushing it.
Yeah.
She just beat Brianna Stewart on the 1v1 12-0 2 days ago. So both. Yeah, I love basketball.
What motivates you on tough days?
My why.
Mm-hmm. One song that always gets you pumped up?
A song that always gets you pumped up. I'm going to go cheesy here and go Lose Yourself, Eminem.
Fantastic. What's your guilty pleasure?
Candy.
And lastly, if you want to give a piece of advice or wisdom to our listeners on any topic?
Whatever you're doing, trying to achieve, going through, starting, whatever that might be, it will never be harder than it is today.
Brant Stachel, it has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your experience.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Fantastic. And to our listeners, I want to leave you with a quote that perfectly captures today's discussion. As Winston Churchill once said, success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that counts. Thank you for tuning in to the Pre-Zero Sports Talk. If you enjoyed the conversation, please take a moment, rate, review, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more incredible guests and insights your way. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep striving for excellence. See you soon.